Hello, everyone. We're live. Let's wait a couple of minutes until the rest of y'all connects. But yeah, I'm so happy to be here. We're joined by Bian Jiang and Heather Tagger. Heather is like the developer relations from Gatling, and Bian is our special guest for today. So let's wait a couple of minutes and we can start this off. I'm so excited that you're here. We have a poll that's already uploaded here about what's high traffic for your business model. So feel free to interact with it. If you have questions or if you have something, please ask it on the chat box, and we will get back to your questions either during the presentation, but most likely at the end of it. So yeah, let's just, we're so happy that you're here. And as I said, let's wait a second or two as the rest of the gang joins and we can start.
Thanks, Diego and Heather. Glad to be here.
No, I'm so happy that you're here. We've been working on, for everyone here, we've been working on this webinar for a minute now. And yeah, I'm very, my expectation and my expectations and my hopes are up to the roof. And yeah, and having Heather here, the developer relations in our first co co manage co webinar is also great because she's going to be able to ask some of the questions that I know you all and audience people want to ask. So I'm sure that it's going to be, awesome. But I think we can start, right?
Great.
All right. So let's get started. Let's talk a little bit about the agenda today. First of all, Bian, welcome. Thank you very much for being here. It's a pleasure. We've collaborated on the customer story and now on this webinar. And it's definitely been awesome. It's been a pleasure to collaborate with you. Could you tell us a little bit more about yourself? Could you
Yeah,
introduce yourself?
sure. Happy to. Hi, everyone. Bian. I'm a software engineer at Attentive. I'm working on the developer experience, CI/CD, and quality load testing and developer tooling at Attentive.
Nice, nice. Anything else that you would like to add, Bian?
Yeah, I think I'm happy to join today's webinar because we've been working with Gatling on our load testing infrastructure, which is the critical part in preparation for the BFCM, which stands for Black Friday, Cyber Monday. BFCM is one of the biggest moments for many of our customers because we'll see high traffic and companies are doing promotion or biggest promotion during the time of the year. So the to make sure our system are behaving correctly and delivering our promises to our customers is critical to us.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Now, a little bit of shameless self promotion about Gatling. Um, so okay, Gat for I'm very sure that like everyone here knows what's Gatling, but let's just like give everyone a little bit of a recap. Gatling is a performance testing tool designed for teams building and operating systems at scale. It helps engineers validate how applications behave under real world load using a test as code approach that fits modern development and SRE workflows. And now let's talk about our four pillars. I'm sorry, about our five pillars. Our pillars are test as code, which is pretty much that all performance tests are written as code. They're versioned, reviewed, and automated like any other part of the software lifecycle. Um, we got flexible test creation. That's pretty much exactly that. Code, no code, Postman, and imports multiple SDKs, including Java, JavaScript, and Kotlin. Um, We also have one of our other pillars is automation, CI/CD integrations, API, run stop criteria, infrastructure as code. Also, and something that's very important for us lately is insights and analytics, real-time dashboards, comparisons, actionable insights and integrations with APM tools, something that we'll probably touch on during this webinar. Also, collaboration, we support RBAC, SSO, quotas, sharing, and team workflows. And now that I covered a little bit of what Gatling is on our pillars, let's talk a little bit more about Attentive. Attentive is a leader in AI-powered mobile marketing that helps more than 8,000 brands deliver personalized experiences across SMSs, RCS, email, and push messaging. For Attentive, every millisecond matters. When major campaigns go live, millions of notifications must reach users in real time. Reliability and performance directly impact customer trust and business outcomes. Bian, is there anything you would like to add to this definition that I gave you, that I gave everyone?
Yeah, I think
About
that's a good summary. I think at Attentive, we help our customers to drive their campaigns, reach customers, and help them increase their revenue via different types of messagings, SMS, email, push notifications, and via the AI-powered journey, so that we can have a personalized promotion to our end users.
awesome. Thank you very much. Now, for what I understand, Attentive platform operates under asymmetric traffic patterns, where periods of normal operation are punctuated by moments of high demand, like as you mentioned, Black Friday and Cyber Monday. In those moments, performance issues affect not only systems, but also customers and business outcomes. How do you think about performance risk at Attentive from a business perspective before it even becomes a technical problem?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think myself is engineer, and as engineer, it's very natural and intuitive to think about performance as a few numbers, like for example, latency, reliability, like error rate, and basically how fast our service can process the incoming request, and how many incoming requests can we process. But at Attentive, we're looking at performance on a higher level or bigger scope. So we look at the performance from the business perspective. So it's not only, for example, P95 latency need to be lower than, for example, 100 milliseconds or 10 milliseconds. But as you mentioned, for BFCM, which is Black Friday, Cyber Monday, so our customers are relying on us to deliver their biggest moment throughout the year in terms of campaign promotions and engaging with the customers or even acquiring new customers or new subscribers. So we're looking at the performance from a slightly different angle than how fast the the system will behave. Instead of looking at that only, or I would say before looking at that aspect, we are looking at it from the angle that how could we deliver our promises to our customers so that they can deliver their promise to their customers. Like for example, there are a few non-negotiable expectations during those big moments. And BFCM is the biggest one, and we have a few other big ones throughout the year, like holidays, festivals. For example, during the big times, if we are sending a promotional campaign, they need to land on the expected time. We have time window where the campaign will be most effective to our customers, and different customers may have different window. So we want to make sure we are landing those campaigns at certain time. And also, we want to make sure the real-time decision engine, which is AI powered, is working as expected, so that we can deliver the personalized promotion messages or journeys or campaigns. And if we map those expectations to our engineering system, that maps to, for example, capacity, latency, and the reliability. And that's how we um, envisioning our performance in engineering will look like. So every year, we do very careful and thorough planning for the big events like BFCM, and teams get together and talk about what would be the expected um, capacity we need for this year and how do we achieve that. And before that, before the real event actually comes, we run different approaches, including load testing, to make sure our system behaves correctly under those like extreme conditions.
Mm. Wow, awesome. Yeah, I definitely, yeah. And so, and correct me if I'm wrong. Your team was already running tests with GHZ, and you were already using Gatling Community Edition successfully. So this wasn't a question about starting that like testing from scratch. So, but as load testing became central, the constraints around tests started to kind of like be more and more important. So, what changed in your requirements that made Gatling Community Edition no longer sufficient on its own?
Yeah, I think as you mentioned, the mentality of doing preparation and running tests, especially load tests, um, before the BFCM or before any big events, that's already in our culture because we have to be ready for those big events. I think there's no doubt that the teams are putting lots of efforts in preparing the capacity of the system to make sure the system is ready for those big events. And we're already using a few tools, as you mentioned. I think last year we're looking at the existing flow or existing process and realized there are some challenges in the iteration. Like for example, um, previously we are deploying our test runners into the cloud, and then we trigger the test runner from there. This is working technically like end to end. We were able to deploy the test runner and let the test run in the cloud and check the results sometime later. But as we are growing our business and are adding more features and we are expanding our scope, and as our engineering team becoming bigger and bigger, we realized that iteration cycle is kind of slowing down the developers because even for a small uh, configuration change, for example, if I want to bump the RPS from uh, 1K to 2K, we have to go through the same process of building the package, uploading the package somewhere, and deploying the test runner to the cloud, and then wait for the deploying to finish and run the test cases and wait for the result. So one of the aspects we're looking is there a solution that we can allow the engineers to iterate faster before we're getting close to the big events. And one of the angle we're looking at is from the developer experience perspective. For example, we were asking the question: can we shorten the iteration time so that they don't have to wait for the deployment? Instead, is there a way they can just schedule the test cases, especially the low test cases, um, directly from the laptop and with instead of waiting for the deployments. So that's why we started the conversation with the Gatling Enterprise, which provides infrastructure and tooling to allow us to do so.
Mm, great. And it also seems that for many teams, and maybe this was the case for Attentive also, where load comes from is just as important as how much load you can generate. So, why was generating load from inside your own infrastructure critical to trusting the results you were getting?
Yeah, I think when it comes to load generation, there are two dimensions which will affect the effectiveness of the load testing. One is how much. So apparently, one of the goals of load testing is to test under huge traffic, uh, is the service still behaving? Well, the first question is the service still up and running? So we need to provide the availability. And second is, uh, is there any latency drop or is there any error rate bump? We want to make sure the service is not up and running, but it's behaving normally. So the volume of the load is definitely one of the dimension we're looking at. But the other aspect, which I think probably is more important, is the composition of the load. For example, if we're just hitting the same endpoint with the same load a million times, probably that's
Mhm.
not a very effective load generation, because I'm sure many services will have the caching, so that that same exact same request will be cached, or maybe starting from the second request, all the responses will be from the cache. So in that case, we won't have the opportunity to exercise the downstream services, for example, the database, the real networking I/O from service to service. So I think generating the load and injecting the load to the process is critical to us, and we want to make sure it's easy for people to do so. They don't have to worry about how they build the infrastructure to actually inject the load to our infrastructure. Instead, we want them to focus on the high level domain specific business logic.
Awesome. Thanks, Bian. Now let's move to the next part of this interview, this webinar that is going to be conducted by my colleague here, Heather. So, oh, Heather, if you want to unmute yourself.
Yeah, thanks for the conversation so far. And it looks like we have a little bit of a question around gRPC, but we can get to that in a second.
Yeah.
But first, I kind of want to hear a little more about the automation layer that you have on top of Gatling Enterprise's API. Y'all created a CLI that lets developers go from code commit to load test results, and sometimes within minutes. And this is a really great example of test as code in practice, where that same simulated jar can run across dev and staging by changing the configuration values. So can you kind of walk us through like what the developer experience is like within your team when someone needs to validate a change, and what their workflow is from their laptop?
Sure. I think one of the cultural significance at Attentive, I believe, at many companies is the developers are responsible for their code and for their product, which means at Attentive we don't have dedicated testing engineers, and the developers are responsible for feature development as well as the quality assurance. So they are responsible for their deliverables. Based on that, when we think about the developer experience in load testing, we want to make sure it's easy and intuitive for them to work on the load testing scenarios for their features. That's why we came up with the command line tool to streamline the process. And the command line tool serves two purposes. One is a tooling for developers to run locally from the laptop, so that they can build the jar. We use Java, by the way, to build the jar locally and um, upload the jar to Gatling Enterprise and schedule the simulation directly from the laptop. And the simulation will run in the cloud for sure, but the scheduling, um, um, the result observing is from the laptop. By doing that, the developers don't have to go to the UI to refresh the browser window to check for the results. And also, when they schedule the simulation, it's easy for them to do so because most of the time is the single line of command. And another use case for the command line tool is the tool was designed so that in a way so that it can be run in our CI job without any changes, which means we have one tool for two environments, one for local and one for CI. And that reduced our maintenance cost because we don't have to maintain another two chain for the CI environment. And later, uh, when we were doing the game day test, which I believe we will talk about later, is that CI tool makes sure the developers and the CI job are using the same flow and same tools, so that whenever there's an issue, it's easy for the developers to reproduce because they are basically using the same tool and they are scheduling the simulations on the same place using the same workflow. And also, I think another design idea behind the load testing infrastructure is we want to make sure the developers only build the jar once, and when the same jar, which contains the simulation test case itself, when the same jar is running in different environments, um, we are able to feed in different configurations. For example, the same simulation can be run in dev environment, in staging environment, and even on staging, we have high load and a low load environment. And all of those are differing by the configuration, which means the developers don't have to spend like repetitive time on building three jars for three configurations. Instead, this is one jar, and they just have to customize the configurations. For example, the domain name, because dev environment and the staging environment may have different domain name for the service to test, and also the RPS target. For example, in the game day test, we're looking at much higher RPS test than the smoke test, which mainly verifies uh, the test is working fine end to end. And so that in the smoke test, we're setting a very low RPS target as the configuration. But regardless of the environment, the jar will be the same.
That's really cool how that's been designed to really help the day-to-day experience for engineers. And I imagine across the different teams of engineers that you're working with, developers, SREs, and services, it kind of changes the way that they approach the performance validation.
Yeah, I think definitely the tooling helped the teams to engage in this load testing effort. And I think we all know, at the time, we all know performance testing and load testing is critical to the success of our business, especially in those big events. I think they want you to participate, and our responsibility as the developer experience team is to provide them the right tooling and the infrastructure to enable them.
Maybe this is a good time to have a look at the architecture diagram that we kind of put together to kind of show how everything's running. Do you want to say a little more about explaining this diagram before we dive too deep into it?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, as you see, the purple part is the Gatling Enterprise Cloud, which act as the routing component for the test scheduling and report collecting, and also the API interface. And the the same flow works locally and on the CI job. As I mentioned, we use the same command line interface to schedule simulations, to build a jar, schedule simulations, which will be scheduled in our case cluster. We use private location from which is a feature from the Gatling Enterprise, and we deployed a control plane in our cluster, which registers itself to the Gatling Enterprise Cloud. And whenever there's a job, no matter it's from the CI or it's from the laptop, they go through the same route, and the job will be picked up by the control plane, which will then start a ephemeral test job pod, and that pod is actually running the load test. And because the entire infrastructure is deployed in our cluster, so they will have the internal access to our service to be tested, and so that the entire process is streamlined. And also, while the test is running, because we enabled the Datadog integration, so the metrics will be uploaded to Datadog, and later we will run a summary generator, which is another tool to pull the data from Gatling Enterprise Cloud via the API and from the Datadog, so that we can correlate the load test run and other metrics, for example, APM of the service, so that we can know what's going on while the load is injecting, and whether the service is behaving correctly, or maybe the most fundamental question, are the injected load actually getting into the service, or it was blocked or throttled by some other components before the actual service layer.
Yes, and you mentioned a few things that we will get into a little bit in a moment. But before we really touch on Datadog or some of the advantages of using the APM and optimization that are making your journey, let's touch a little bit on like the test modeling and gRPC aspect. So the tests you guys have combined both the synchronous gRPC requests with the simulated stream events, which really reflects the real mix of traffic for your backend is handling, your backend. So many of those load test tools out there, they kind of struggle with this kind of like mixed protocol simulation, and with message delivery at Attentive involving both the request response patterns and asynchronous event streams. How do you really model this complexity within the Gatling simulations, and how do you validate that both paths are performing correctly under the load tests?
Yeah, I think sometime before the BFCM, we started a process called game day tests. So the game day tests focused on the collaboration or the coordination of multiple services, like simulating the real production scenario where almost all the services are on high pressure in terms of the incoming traffic. And in those game day tests, we have the CI pipeline set up so that we trigger the gRPC load as well as the simulated events to the stream at the same time, so that they can hit the ecosystem in the same time frame. And that's where we observe whether, for example, whether the events are digested correctly and in a fast fashion. Um, as you know, some of the services are not purely request based, meaning they behave like you send the service a request and the service gives you a response. Some services are event based, which means they are subscribers to one or more event streams. And to test the performance of those services, we need to simulate event injection to some of the streams so that we can test whether the service is behaving. And we also have an internal service which can help us injecting events to the stream. And the Gatling test cases, some of the Gatling test cases are triggering that service so that we can have a coordinated event injection and the request generation.
Interesting. Yeah, it sounds like there's some complexities going on to really mimic the production traffic that I wish we could get into, but probably not, smart to do that. And just taking a little segue to the question asked in the question channel. I think this is, and of course, I know that maybe gRPC request response traffic is a little more technical than maybe some of our audience members is already has familiarity with, but the question is, what exactly does it mean, the gRPC load exposed the connector and generator? And I think this question kind of touches on Gatling's gRPC load testing with the protocol. It provides the two components, the connector, which handles the connection and the protocol to the gRPC service, and then the generator, which creates the test scenarios and requests. And so essentially it just kind of exposes the building blocks that are needed for the customers to kind of configure and run those load tests.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if there's more to add there, if there's more you'd like to say around that.
Yeah, I think we use the gRPC plugin in Gatling, which allows us to specify the protocol, including, for example, domain name, the port, as well as a few gRPC specific configurations. And also, we're using a feature from Gatling called feeder, which allows us to generate large amount of load using some generation algorithm. For example, we can generate um, a list of gRPC requests from a CSV. Um, and that CSV contains some combination of different parameters, and we can like cycle through that CSV so that we can have more traffic. Um, yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, the feeders is a really cool feature within Gatling. And I hope that answers the question. If you want to hear a little more about this, we'll have some a webinar and I think some content that we're working on currently about gRPC specifically in the future. And also always feel free to reach out to me and Diego and the Gatling team if you want to hear more about these sort of tools that we have available. Okay, awesome. So going back to maybe the architecture diagram and kind of switching over to understand more of Datadog's role within your architecture and workflow. So you already had Datadog deployed for production telemetry, but you've also integrated it deeply into the load testing workflow with taking these automated test results from both Gatling and the Datadog APIs and correlating those metrics with the traces in a central dashboard. So how do you kind of structure those dashboards within Datadog to show both the Gatling generated load and the resulting application behavior side by side? And what are some of the signals that become visible with this combined view?
Yeah, I think that you raised a very good point. So one of the key part of the success of the load testing is what kind of signals are we getting in terms of the performance or in terms of the capacity of the service. I think, as you mentioned, we're already using Datadog to collect metrics from production and from our services. And when we run load test, one of the signals we're trying to observe is uh, well, two fundamental signals. One is the load testing effective, which means for example, when we are generating 10K RPS from a simulation, and are those 10K RPS actually hitting the service, or is hitting something else and got throttled or rate limited? I think one of the interesting story I can share is initially we were trying to hit one service with very high RPS, like way higher than 10K. We have services which handles much more. And the test um, kind of failed because we got lots of errors. Not errors from the service, but errors like unavailable or timeout. And we were wondering what's going on. And then we look at the APM, and surprisingly or not surprisingly, we actually did not see that amount of RPS actually hitting the service from the APM perspective. So the service is taking maybe 10%, 20% of the RPS than we were expecting. And we looked deeper. Actually, we found another bottleneck, which is on the gateway. So the gateway kind of crashed because the gateway was not expecting that amount of load during that load testing time. And we worked with our infrastructure team to fix that issue in the gateway. And now we tested again. We're actually seeing that high RPS on the service. And now it's the service turn to fail, which is good because we identified more issues on the service. I think the visibility and the signal definitely helped a lot to let us know whether we're actually really testing, or maybe a better way of saying this statement is that whether we're actually testing the component we want to test. For example, in the story I just shared, initially we were kind of testing, which is also useful. We were testing the gateway actually, not the service itself. But now with the combination of APM and the the Gatling enterprise signals, we were able to identify how far the injected load went in the pipeline. So I, ideally, they should go all the way to the service, and then the same load will need to be propagated like proportionally to the downstream services or downstream system like database, cache, or event stream. But when we're not seeing that, that's also a strong signal telling us that something in the middle is not behaving correctly, and that helped us identify even more problems than just the service itself.
Yeah, very, interesting. I'm glad you guys caught it, that gap within the request per second. And if I remember correctly from the customer story, was it that the auto scaling needed to be tuned more to make up the difference, or was that a different?
Yeah, there are two changes the infra team made. One is the auto scaling. Another one is a protection mechanism so that the bottom line is that the gateway shouldn't crash when there are more load than the gateway could handle. Either we should throttle, uh, or we should, well, in the worst case, drop the request. But the gateway itself shouldn't crash, because when it crashes, the entire gateway is gone, and no request will go through. But if it's throttling or queuing, at least the services work, the gateway is working, but it's just processing slowly.
So I imagine y'all kind of kept an eye on some of the TCP connection pooling and the gRPC like shared channel opportunities when kind of monitoring and fixing and fine tuning those aspects.
Yeah. I think that's after we figure out what's going on in the gateway, and we're actually looking at like the extreme case of RPS and see how we could get that through. One of the issues we observed was it looks like the RPS was capped at about 6K per load runner, or per node, per virtual machine. Yeah, that's where we looked into the signals from the Gatling Cloud, and we realized the number of TCP connections were super high. It's like 70K per machine. That's way beyond even the operating system limitation. And we looked deeper and realized we were creating one TCP connection per gRPC request, and we are injecting a lot of load. That's a lot of TCP connections, especially when some of the uh, gRPC request is slow. So they're holding on that connection, which means the connection was kept open. That's why we're seeing like 70K like active TCP connections on the operating system. And then we looked into a few solutions, and then we switched to a shared channel, which allows us to cap the number of connections to a certain level. And after that, we were able to hit much higher RPS from a single machine. I think in the extreme case, we're hitting, I want to say 160K, but I don't think that was the extreme. But I don't remember the exact number, but the exact number is much higher than that from a single machine.
Yeah, that's still honestly very impressive. I think a lot of tests are running just like a couple of thousand or maybe tens of thousands or is their high end. So I think 160,000 is, in my opinion, impressive for request per
Yeah,
second
and
for
that's
one node.
not just and that's not just a bragging scenario. One of our services are actually expecting that amount of load during the BFCM. So it's a legit test case instead of just like academically researching the capacity of the system.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I know, especially in the US, Black Friday, people go crazy for that. So I know I've taken advantage of a few deals too. So, and I think it's
Yeah.
actually a global event at this point. And here in Spain, they don't really know why it's Black Friday or what it means. They just know it
No,
happens.
we just know that we get things on the cheap. That's like
Yeah, discounts in November or
yeah.
in December.
It just happens, and there are discounts. That's what we know.
Yeah. Um, so for those who don't know, it's the day after Thanksgiving, and Thanksgiving is the fourth Thursday of November. Anyway, back to the metrics and the correlation of data. As much as we love holidays, so we've mentioned a few key metrics that y'all are watching the TCP connections and requests per seconds, and those are pretty vital and significant. But are there any other metrics that you guys are kind of watching during a load test that really help to validate what Gatling is generating and what y'all are expecting with performance?
Yeah, I think uh, the whole end-to-end performance flow consists of two parts. One is injecting load, running the load test to make sure the load reaches the service. The second part is evaluating the results. I think um, that's where we created the summary generator to surface the critical signals, not only about whether the test succeeded or whether the test completed normally, but more of is the is the simulation providing useful signals to the teams or um, to the executive team. Um, for example, we used assertions, which is the feature from Gatling Enterprise, to validate not only the simulation completed, but also the performance signal we're observing are within the expected range. For example, the latency shouldn't be too high, the error rate shouldn't be too high, and the amount of requests and the responses shouldn't be too low. So that's one of the signals the summary generator is generating and surfacing. And to raise the awareness of the teams, we even sorted the results by the status. By, for example, the first category we want to address immediately is the test crash, which means the test didn't even work. Um, that's the first category we want to address. The second category is the test succeeded or completed. I would say completed, but there's a searching failure, which means the load is there, but the service or something in the middle was not behaving as expected. That's where teams need to look into whether it's a service problem or it's a configuration problem or it's something in the middle. And another interesting aspect we're looking at is the duration of the test. So that's especially interesting in the early stage of the test preparation, because in the first few weeks of the load testing effort, we observed lots of green test cases, but they're running just for 5-10 seconds. And of course, they're green because they're just running a smoke test on, for example, health check endpoint at 5 times. Um, in the beginning of this journey, we explicitly surfaced this kind of test results and calling them out and asking teams to look into those like placeholder like simulations to make sure they're actually bringing value to the performance signal. And apparently, some of them are just teams creating a smoke test or creating the sanity check and forgot to add real content in the simulations. So that helped us identify those like placeholder like simulations, and teams got to add real logic in the simulation.
Yeah, that's very interesting. As much as we all love the green validation of like kind of a vanity metric, it's also really important to understand what the meaning is behind those green check marks. And if it ends at a smoke test, then what does this actually mean? Yeah, I think as we sub test and get deeper into different strategies for performance testing, maybe some dashboards are more meaningful than others, and some reports show more than others, and is when kind of comparing like what you can see within the Datadog dashboards of the load testing metrics and the server side metrics, is there something that you prefer looking like more within the Gatling's UI report versus the Datadog dashboards? Or
Yeah,
are there like anomalies that are better visualized in one over the other?
yeah.
Like
I think
around security?
the correlation is the key to getting the meaningful signals, like especially on time frame, because besides load testing, our services also getting traffic from other sources, other, for example, other types of testing or developer activities. And to correlate the traffic in the same time range as load testing was running is critical. And also correlation between the load pattern is also critical, because when we ramp up the pattern, we're not just going from 0 to, for example, 100K RPS within 10 seconds. We are gradually ramping up the traffic pattern, trying to simulate what's really happening in production environment in those big events. And we're watching those patterns between, for example, APM and the load testing. And when we want to dive deeper, I think the Gatling Enterprise UI will be very helpful, because it gives us the detailed attributes or metrics of the load test run. For example, the RAM consumption, the CPU consumption on the load test runner side. And that's how we identified the TCP connection problem, which helped us solve the RPS cap issue.
For sure, yeah. I think there's a lot of benefit of seeing some of those top level metrics within Datadog, but then when you're really investigating what's going on under the hood, maybe more so with infrastructure, perhaps the Gatling UI is little clearer with problem solving or finding actions. Um, and obviously you guys are like orchestrating these multi-service scenarios where there's dependencies that need to be validated together, and tons of results to kind of work through and correlate with your services. And as you kind of move through and have these like daily tests running, even with CI/CD integration, how do you kind of envision like orchestrating more of these like complex multi-service tests, and maybe some of the challenges that you could face as performance continues to mature within the company?
Yes, that's actually one of the goals for us this year, or even this quarter. Um, so one of the feedback we've got from last year's BFCM preparation, including collaboration, coordination, and load testing infrastructure and tooling, is um, we we want to make sure we are prepared as early as possible, but it doesn't mean we want to run game day, that like the game day scale as early as possible. So that means we want to make sure our tests are ready. So one of the ways to make sure our tests are ready and the service are ready is to run this in a continuous fashion. And I think the game day test is kind of a continuous run, but only happened sometime before the BFCM preparation, or during the BFCM preparation, sometime before the BFCM. We want to expand this practice to a more frequent cadence. Like for example, maybe we can start the load test run on a weekly basis, but with relatively lower load, so that we can exercise the load testing flow and make sure the service is behaving on the like a little higher load, as well as the tests are behaving correctly. I think that's one of the projects we are working on this year, to make sure we are getting ready earlier.
Yeah, I think it's never too early to start kind of understanding the nature of your performance, especially under these high stress, high load sort of events. And and I imagine as you're doing testing more regularly, it helps to kind of track like performance regressions over time with more consistent trends to compare, versus like ad hoc testing right before events, as we all know and love, as a not so great practice. But is there more that you'd like to say there around tracking like performance regressions?
Yeah, I think teams are still doing ad hoc testing, especially when they plan to ship a big feature or big refactoring, or after they ship the big refactoring, they want to run ad hoc testing to verify or to double confirm the system is working fine. But we were not solely relying on that ad hoc testing as the preparation, because if we found some issue in ad hoc testing, that might be too late, especially if we run ad hoc testing very close to the big events. And we still provide that capability because we have the command line tool to to allow people to easily do so. And the bigger investment will be in the pipelines infrastructure, which automatically provides people the signal about the performance of their services, so that they don't have to open their laptop and manually run that on a daily basis, on a weekly basis by themselves.
It's nice that y'all use a variety of strategies when it comes to testing performance, both ad hoc and these regular practices. That just goes to show that there's a complexity of situations that need to be addressed across the organization. Let me switch over real fast to, I think there are some more questions that came in that could be relevant.
Yeah, we have a question from Trevor. Questions. Trevor's asking, what is Gatling's best practices for setting up suites of testing? Or more broadly speaking, does Gatling have suites for APM tools? I use Dynatrace, and I saw that you guys just added the open telemetry integration.
Trevor, great question. Actually working on a Dynatrace webinar for next month. The date will be released soon, so keep an eye open for that. And we also have integrations with New Relic and InfluxDB, as well as Datadog. And we have a little bit of information within our docs under APM tools and tooling for getting started and getting things up and running. And now that I'm becoming more of a Dynatrace expert, I could help you with some of those questions if anything comes up. So I'm not entirely sure. I think we could probably talk about best practices forever and ever in terms of setting up testing. And I think that is a really good topic for a different webinar. But is there anything specific that you wanted to hear about here? So I think with Datadog especially, it was not too difficult to integrate the Gatling load testing metrics into the dashboard, right? I think it's just a couple of API keys that you have to generate and plug in. Am I wrong? Bian, was it easy to integrate your metrics into the Datadog dashboard?
I think that we didn't have to do anything. It's automatic.
Okay, cool. Yeah, maybe it's easier than I thought then.
Trevor just said that I know you're going to be at Perform and that they will be doing a demo for Dynatrace. Trevor, I'm your voice.
I'll make sure that we connect later, Trevor, and we can follow up on that. I know that we're running slightly short on time. Let's hear, and I think that's kind of everything I wanted to get into in terms of continuous testing, correlation, and looking at Datadog and architecture. So I'll throw it back over to you, Diego.
Okay, so as we're running drawn to a close. Oh, okay. I want to talk a little bit about a little bit more about, sorry. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit more about the results and the lessons you've learned with Gatling. For what I could hear throughout today's conversation, what's really interesting in your case is that load testing didn't just stop at load testing. It evolved into something that's continuous, that's daily with daily game day runs, that surface changes over time, that rather than just being like a one-off kind of thing where we're looking at the green pass green vanity metrics. So, looking back, I would like to know what kind of lessons did you learn once load testing shifted from validation, just validation, to a continuous practice?
Yeah, I think at Attentive we all share the same mentality that load testing is very important to make sure our services are ready for the big events, and we do want the engineers or the teams to participate in this effort. And to achieve that, we we need to make sure the flow and the infrastructure are easy to use and intuitive, so that we are not adding additional burden to their workflow. And we're hoping the learning curve is very flat for them, so that they can focus on the testing or the simulation logic from their end. I think that's how we were able to move from the ad hoc testing to the continuous fashion. Uh, I think from the developer experience perspective, that's what matters most if we want to ramp people up from different teams and let them participate in this big effort.
Mm. And how did that shift change the kind of issues you catch or the assumptions you no longer make? How has that changed?
I think the signals gives us uh, the action plan or the confidence in the service. Also, when the signal revealed some issues, that's good too. That's the moment we know we need to fix something. Yeah, I think observability definitely played a key role here, because running load test is just one thing. We're just taking actions, but what's more important is the what kind of feedback those actions gave us. Like for example, when we enabled the Datadog integration, we were able to generate the summary, which gives us uh, different kind of signals so that we can take actions accordingly.
And that kind of ties in with my question. Um, how do you see observability driven load testing evolving at Attentive before beyond what you've been doing so far? What's next in terms of like observability driven load testing for
Yeah,
you?
I think that would be built into part of the continuous testing. So the continuous testing is not only triggering load test once a week or triggering a set of load tests once a week, but more importantly is once those simulations finished, what kind of signal we want to present to the teams and how do we present them. For example, how do we make those signals actionable? When there's an issue, what will be the fix, and where should be the fix? I think
Mm,
that's something we are looking into. So triggering those simulations is not it's not super hard, but it's important to provide the right interpretation regarding what's coming back from the simulations, and how those signals are applied to the improvements or any changes to the services. I think that's what we're working on.
wonderful. And now, since we're already like way past the time we had allotted for this. Bian, you all know I'm a marketing person, and I would like to hear from you one little soundbite that I can use forever and ever. If you had to summarize the value of combining what you've used with Gatling with observability tools in one sentence, what would it be? What's the value of all what you've achieved with Gatling and observability and private locations and gRPC and
Yeah, I think
everything?
combining the private location observability and the test configuration as code, I think that completes the streamlined end-to-end load testing flow, which allows us to iterate fast and get us more prepared.
Wonderful. That's yeah. That's Incredible. And let's talk a little bit more about what's next for us in Gatling. Actually, not what's next, what's currently happening. Heather, would you like to tell us a little bit more about Gatling AI, or should I tell them? Should I? Should
Um,
you?
I mean, there's definitely a lot we could say about, performance engineering and AI, but the two kind of interesting pieces for what we're doing with AI is we have assistance in some IDEs, and we also have these AI summaries in test runs. So if you'd like to hear more or play around with this yourself, then let us know, reach out, and you can also find more about what we're doing with AI on our website.
Yeah, just go to www.gatling.io/AI, and you'll find more about what we're doing with AI. You can play with our test assistant. It's fire, I assure you. So feel free, Trevor. I know you're typing, so I'll leave you type. I'll let you type, and I think it's time for y'all's questions also. So if there's a question that we have that we hadn't touched on, or there's something you want to learn about Gatling, this is your moment. Bian is already here for you. It's also here for you. Heather, of course, they will be able to answer like the more technical questions. So if you have something, now is your moment. Let us know.
Yeah, I'm glad we were able to weave in some of those questions while we were like on certain topics. So that was really
Yeah.
nice.
Yeah.
And we're always available to talk more about these topics. And we definitely have a lot of really cool webinars coming up, both on observability, gRPC, and some more evergreen topics. So be on the lookout for those on our LinkedIn page and website. And I don't know, maybe it's time to wrap up. I know we've been
Yeah.
talking for an hour. I feel like I could talk to Bian for many
Ooh,
hours.
yeah.
But,
Yeah, that's the
yeah.
problem when you're. Yeah. Thank you very much, Bian. Thank you very much, Heather. This has been a blast. It didn't really feel like an hour for me. And yeah, I know we could like stay for hours just discussing these things and other things that we have in common, but time time's fickle. So thank you very much for your continued presence here. You're all great. And stay tuned for more webinars, and have a good night, good day, good afternoon, whatever you all. Oh, John Kyle is typing. Oof. Okay.
He's
Let's
probably
just wait.
thanks.
Probably. But let's
Or I
just
don't know, maybe it's a question.
yeah, let's just give them a sec. Okay, thanks everyone.
Yeah.
All
Thank you.
righty,
Thanks for
thank
being here.
you. Have a good day, y'all. It was
Take care.
incredible. Take
Thank you.
care.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.